Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video. So in this video, and it's going to be a really short one, I'll just briefly talk about Quarto. And the main idea is just so you know that it exists, because probably in the future it will become more and more important, and might even take over R Markdown as a publishing tool. And so I titled it The Next Generation of Markdown, because the two are like very closely related. They're slightly different. And one is currently being like kind of pushed more by RStudio, so the company that also developed this one, whereas the other one is like a bit being less developed and like more R specific. So I think it's good to have an idea of that both exists, and in the future, like I said, Quarto might be the new thing that gets developed much more. Yeah, so I kind of the new kid on the block. So let me briefly, and we'll touch back here on the slides from before. So if you remember, this is basically the slide I've showed you before on where I try to distinguish our Markdown and knitr. So you see again, we have the RMD document. By knitr it gets converted to a Markdown document, and then by pandoc it gets converted into the final outputs. We have also these sorts of like extra packages that add some functionality. And then switching over to Quarto, what kind of Quarto does, you see it's very similar actually if I go back and forth between the two, not much changes. But one of the big things it does is that it suddenly creates one ecosystem. So it's this one package that does all these things. It still under the hood uses the same packages as our Markdown, but it replaces all these plugins. So all these extra packages that we had here are suddenly all included in Quarto, and it gets a bit less R specific, which I think is also quite nice. So instead of RMDs, we suddenly use QMDs. There's some slight changes in how we specify our code. Most of it is actually exactly the same as our Markdown. But suddenly it becomes much easier to also use Python, Julia, or JavaScript in these Quarto documents, which is also, like I said, it's a really messy distinguishing thing. It's also possible technically in R Markdown. It's just really inconvenient. So in Quarto, these other languages kind of become first-class citizens, which is nice. And you can, for example, instead of using knitr to run your code, you can also suddenly use Jupyter as an engine, which of course works much nicer with Python support. So I think like really this cross-language stuff is the really big benefit. And I'm expecting this to be developed a bit more since it's like the current new thing. So it might eventually replace our Markdown, which is why I'm talking about this here. And of course, it's really nice that you kind of have this one package to do all these things. So like basically the whole last presentation I gave on this package ecosystem around our Markdown, with Quarto, you kind of get all of this in one package. That's one of the big benefits. And here's just kind of the text version of all what I just said. So it's standalone software. It's actually not just an R package. Developed by Posit, so formerly RStudio, which just renamed themselves. But it aims to be programming language agnostic, so much more flexible with the languages. Combines all the functionality from the R Markdown packages, and uses this new QMD format, which is very similar to RMD, with just some like really minor differences. But also the RStudio code editor, like all this just continues to work also with Quarto. And here quickly on the graphics that I'm using here. And that's it already for this video. See you in the next one.